And I'm going to first start by addressing what I suspect might be in the back of some of your minds related to this title, just some skepticism you might have. First is me, shape the human impact of technology. Is this really something for me to do, or is it just for people like Steve Jobs? But Steve Jobs isn't around anymore, so it's
yes, he's left it to you.
He's left it to all of you. But really,
thank you very much.
You can influence human impact of technology. This represents a pot, like you can shape it on the potter's wheel, and these are forces that shape it. So how it's designed, if you're not in, say, Steve Jobs' role, you maybe can't affect that so directly, but you can still affect it because partly just by the opinions that you express to other people, the feedback you give to technology companies, but also the design of an individual piece of technology is just one part of the design of your overall technological environment that you interact with. What you choose, how you configure it, and how you use it is actually all kind of design too. And by owning the control of that, so realizing that you can influence that, you can actually be designing how technology impacts you and your company and your customers. So the other part is, how can this help me grow my business? What does this have to do with it? Well, business growth depends on humans, such as you, your employees, and your customers. What they do and how they think and how they feel really ends up determining how your business does. And in particular, the kinds of things it depends on is their decision-making, productivity, creativity. Now, if this is your customers we're talking about, depending on what kind of business you're in, if your business helps your customers to be more creative or more productive or in a more positive mood, make better decisions, that's going to really increase the value of your business to your customers, whatever your business is. So that can grow your business just by growing the value of what you offer. And if you and your employees make better decisions, are more creative, more productive, in a more positive mood, have better attitude, and in better health, then you'll run your business better, your costs will be lower, and you'll just be more effective at serving your customers. So I hope that convinces you to listen to the rest of the talk, because it really can help you, even though at first it might sound like something that's sort of somebody else's job. So let's look at what are the human impacts of technology. Well, early on, when computer technology first became available, the goals were really function or fun. So on the left here, you've got an early predecessor of the Excel-type spreadsheets that we're all quite familiar with now. It performed functions that before this, you just couldn't do. I mean, at most you maybe had a calculator, an adding machine or something. But this was an incredible new thing to be able to do, incredible new function. And then you had fun, arcade games like Space Invaders. And in terms of human impact, of course, for games to be successful, they have to engage the users, they have to be fun. And so there's a kind of human impact there that you've got to get right. But for function, you can make something that will add up numbers for you incredibly hard to use, and yet it will still have value if it's the only alternative, or if it's the first time there's been something like this. So the first human impact that really came to light was ease of use, because these initial systems, particularly ones that were for business purposes and did complex functions like financial analysis or databases, they were so complex to use, you had to read a fantastic manual to learn to use them, or go to a fantastically long training class. And so initially, the goal of focusing on human impact was just to get rid of this fantastic manual so things could be intuitive. You could sit down in front of it, kind of pretty much figure it out, have it communicate to you what it does, and get value of it right from the beginning. So what about other human impacts? Are there other human impacts, or is it pretty much technology provides function and entertainment and it needs to be compatible so we can figure out how to use it? Well, there are some others, and here's why. Technology has an inescapable humanness about it. Even though we think of it as kind of the opposite of human, like we're all squishy and we have feelings and consciousness and things, and technology is like hard and has metal and silicon and it's mechanical. But since we create it, the way we think, the people who make the technology, the way they think, the way they feel, how they're motivated, and how they relate to the users they're designing for, their assumptions and relationships there, those go right into the nature of the technology. And then the nature of the technology, when the person uses it, affects how they think, affects their feelings, often how they relate to their own feelings, and certainly what they do, which the arrow to his hand represents. We can look at this a little more deeply or in more detail in terms of 7 paths of human impact. So you first have this path to ease of use, which was the first one that I mentioned, and first became obvious because we wanted to get rid of the fantastic manual. But then you have, and make it user-friendly. But you then have secondary impact of ease of use on thinking, feeling, and doing. Some of them are fairly obvious if you picture computer rage. Somebody who's just so frustrated with their computer, they want to throw it out the window or drop it from a 10-story building or something like that. Feeling, I mean, you can certainly, you can feel frustrated if something is hard to use and confusing. I'm going to look at those in a minute, particularly with an example from thinking that is quite a bit less obvious. But I'm going to spend a bit more time on the 3 paths at the top, directly from technology to thinking, feeling, and doing, where it's ease of use isn't the issue, really. It's just not part of the issue. It's a more direct relationship. And that's where it gets less obvious and, for me, more interesting and there's more untapped potential there. Because a lot of people nowadays know that ease of use is important. And it's getting harder and harder for technology makers to compete if they don't take ease of use seriously, depending on what industry they're in to some extent. So let's look at human impacts 2, 3, and 4. These are the indirect impacts of ease of use on thinking, feeling, and doing. And I'm just going to take thinking as an example, thinking of examples of feeling and doing are not too hard and reasonably obvious. Now, cognitive ease is a phenomenon that's discussed in a book by Daniel Kahneman called Thinking Fast and Slow. One among many fascinating things he discusses there. But what this research found was that the ease that your brain has in processing information doesn't just affect, say, how fast you process it, but it affects things you wouldn't expect necessarily, like credibility. So can anybody tell me which of these 2 statements is true about Adolf Hitler? Well, it's a trick question because neither of them are true.
They're different.
Yeah, they're both slightly wrong. He was actually born in 1889. But what this research found was that if you put a statement in a bold font, people were more likely to judge it as true.
That's what I figured your answer was. That's why I picked the answer.
trying to trip me up.
Always messing with our heads.
So if you think of the ways this could apply in a business context, the examples I'm going to give, by the way, are from a healthcare context, because this started out as a talk for a healthcare technology audience. So I'm going to have to ask you to do a little bit of work to come up with examples for your own businesses. But this one, an example that came to mind for me when thinking about healthcare is when I take my daughters to the doctor, I was given these handouts, like normal development of an 8-month-old, normal development of a 5-year-old, how much Tylenol to give them if they have a fever and things like that. And they tend to be on these really unattractive sort of 10th generation photocopies that are kind of murky grey text on a light grey murky background, and sort of the angle is off because they didn't put the photocopier the right way. And it seems like it's a photocopy of a photocopy of a photocopy. Now that's something which everybody would agree doesn't look particularly good. But I think if you ask most people, they'd say, does this really matter? They'd say, oh no, it's just an aesthetic issue. It's like, it gives you the information you need, right? What this suggests is, although technically it gives you the information you need, it may not give you it in a form that enables you to use it and find it credible and persuasive. So having those photocopies be mucky, yucky looking and hard to read may actually reduce the compliance with the recommendations or even the attention to the information. So parents may not be paying as much attention to what their doctors are telling them if their doctors are telling them it in a hard to read text. So implications for any business really are pretty clear. Like if you're sending an email and the font is kind of hard to read, people may not find your messages compelling, even with exactly the same text. I'm sure Tricia would agree with that. But all kinds of other things where the information that you're interfacing with, maybe where it's very important to pay attention to some details or to take some details seriously, if the technology presents that in a way that makes it harder for your brain to read it, that may really undermine your ability to actually treat the information with the importance it deserves. So that's secondary impacts of ease of use. Now let's look at some more direct impacts. Here's one from technology directly to thinking, to how we think. And this is another example that you could read about in Thinking Fast and Slow, of something where people, including people you would think ought to be able to do this kind of task well, are very bad at combining information about a population, statistics, with information about an individual. So imagine this, that you go to the doctor and you're worried that you might have orange plague. And this jar represents the fact that you and the doctor know that 1 in 1,000 people have orange plague. So similar to if you close your eyes and reach into the jar and shook it around, pulled out a marble, how likely would it be to be orange? Then, but then the doctor gives you a test that's a 95% accurate test. And it says you have orange plague. Now, if you're like many people, including almost 50% of Harvard medical students in a study, and a large proportion of actual practicing doctors, you will say, oh no, this test is at 95% accurate. It says I have orange plague. I must be 95% likely to have orange plague. Now, the actual answer, anyone want to guess what the actual answer is? Under 2%. Because when you combine the statistics of the population, that it was only 1 in 1,000 chance to start with a 95% accurate test, you have to combine that 95% accuracy with what's called the prior probability. And that's something that people just don't do intuitively. When you don't give them information about the individual, they'll say correctly, yeah, it's 1 in 1,000 chance. But as soon as you give them information about the individual, they just forget about what they knew about the population, think it's irrelevant, and just focus only on the information about the individual. Obviously, in a medical context, this could have really bad consequences, and in many other contexts too. It could lead to really poor decisions. However, there are ways to improve the situation, and since nowadays most of the information we're making decisions on the basis of is presented to us by technology, it's a perfect opportunity to provide help that will help us think better, make better decisions at the same time. So one example is it's sort of simple, is a follow-up study to this found that just telling people to think like a statistician made them do this task far better. Whereas telling them to think like a clinician actually made them do it worse. Which actually, it's no offense to clinicians, but it makes sense if you think about it. Because if you think of what you want a clinician or a doctor to focus on, you think you want them to be focused on you. Right? You don't want them to be thinking you're one member of millions of people and you're a statistic and just like an example of a probability. You want them to be focused on you and what's wrong with you and how they can help you. But if you tell people to think like a clinician, they make a pretty gross error here of judgment. So if you're providing this kind of information, anytime there's statistical information and information about the individual through a technology situation, having some cue that reminds people to think like a statistician could really help. But until people are designing technology or modifying technology in ways that take this kind of thing into account, that's not going to be in there, and the decisions are still going to be affected by the normal human biases. Let's look at feeling. Doctors and healthcare workers who interact a lot with patients who either are going through or have gone through really traumatic or stressful events or suffering intensely, they often come to suffer from something called secondary traumatic stress or compassion fatigue, which is the suffering of the people they're trying to help rubs off on them, and they experience burnout or even clinical depression. It can be pretty serious. It's not just a kind of minor life stress. But this has been looked at a lot in terms of what you can do to improve the situation, and the key to it apparently is early recognition of and insight into the strong emotions that this relationship, this helping relationship, creates, which I think often helping professionals aren't really trained to think about that because they're just thinking about their job is to help the person who's so much worse off than them, Like they'd almost probably think it would be kind of selfish of me to be thinking about how bad I feel when this person has just been through a natural disaster or a cancer or whatever. However, there's a real cost to not paying attention to that and respecting that your own emotions are important too. So let's say doctors, they're filling out a chart every time they have a meeting with a patient. What if that chart, which is now typically electronic, just had a simple question at the end of it? Just rate the emotional impact on you of this interaction with the patient, low, medium, high. Let's say that was, it got a little more complex than that. If you said high, it didn't ask you any follow-up questions or anything, but just this. But this could potentially unobtrusively bring the provider's attention to the emotional impact on them, and therefore might have quite a big impact on reducing instances of secondary traumatic stress. So it's a healthcare example again, but hopefully you get the picture that there are findings such as this about how people respond to information that could be embedded into technology to make the technology far more helpful to the people. And in ways that aren't necessarily about what the technology is officially for. Like this would be part of a technology that's officially just for patient record keeping. You fill out a chart, it's electronic health records. It's not a system for minimizing secondary traumatic stress, but it may be the perfect place to put in a little intervention like this that could help. Lastly, let's look at technology and its effect on our behavior. A recent study from Johns Hopkins University has found that primary care physicians have less emotional rapport with overweight and obese patients than with normal weight patients. Now, this study didn't try and find out why this was. They thought this might be the case, so they set up a study where they could scientifically find out whether this was the case or not, and it was. So first, of course, to improve the situation, if you think about it, it's a pretty bad situation because, I mean, everybody needs good rapport with their doctor, but if you've got more health problems rather than less, you probably need it even more, but you're getting less. So social psychology could help us to understand what's going on here. And just to make it a little more vivid, I'll give an example that's just off the top of my head, but it's the kind of thing you could find out with research. So my guess about what might be going on here is that the physicians feel uncomfortable because they feel in conflict about their role as a doctor, where they feel like they ought to be telling the person, you really should be losing weight, this is unhealthy, you're going to die earlier and stuff like that. But just as an interpersonal social relationship, they feel like they're going to be offensive, they're going to hurt the person's feelings, or anyway, so they feel uncomfortable, and so they kind of shut down emotionally, they don't feel relaxed, and they don't have the same rapport they would if they were feeling more comfortable. So that's just an idea, which would need to be validated scientifically. But once we knew what's causing this, then technology is the perfect way to deliver that help. So the traditional approach might be like we figure out what's going on here and we send all the doctors to some half-day seminar to tell them, like, here's why you feel uncomfortable with obese and overweight patients, here's why it is, so next time you're with one, remember you can use this phrase to address their weight in a respectful way or something. That probably is somewhat helpful, but the technology they're working with knows whether the patient is obese or overweight, it has their height and weight in it. It could therefore just unobtrusively deliver a reminder or some kind of hint about how to address weight with the patient, only in cases where it was relevant, which would make it far more powerful. The doctors wouldn't have to keep on remembering this among all the gazillion other things they have to remember. The technology could just help them right when it was needed. So another example, again, it's from healthcare, but if you think of important behaviors in your business or your customers, how could technology give them help just when it would be the most helpful to achieve their goals or your goals? Okay, so what should you take home from this? I know I started out by doing my best to persuade you to listen to the rest of it. It really is relevant that you can control this, not completely, but you can have much more influence over human impact of technology than you probably think, and that it really is relevant to your business's success. But then we went into a lot of fairly complex stuff about paths of impact and healthcare examples that, with none of us being in healthcare, probably don't have the same impact on us as if it was really something we could directly relate to. But the first thing I would take home, and don't know, but the next slide is about healthcare too. It's about how you think of yourself, not as a doctor, but as a business leader. So the best doctors, I would imagine you probably will all agree, don't just mechanically diagnose ailments and prescribe treatments, but they actually build a relationship with the patient that has a positive influence on the patient's thinking, feeling, and what they do. Particularly their emotional resilience around a challenging health situation. They're thinking rationally about what they should do about it. Like if the patient needs to make a decision about treatment, part of the doctor's role is to help them make a good decision, not just some knee-jerk reaction or something that may be quite irrational. And what they do, say complying with recommendations, can be really critical to how the treatment goes, whether they get better or not. Do they take their pills? Do they follow exercise or diet recommendations? So similarly, the best business leaders don't just treat technology as something that does functions, like that adds up numbers or takes care of some task so that humans don't have to do it, or so it's cheaper, but they actually view technology as something that they can shape, where they can shape how it's designed, even if not the individual parts, the sort of configuration and the way you use it, how it's configured, like does it interrupt you every time you get an email, for example, and how it's used, both how you use it, how you encourage your employees to use it, or how you support your customers in using it. All of that can be shaped to have positive influence not only on ease of use and the consequences of ease of use, but directly on how people think, feel, and what they do. So how could you get more effective at shaping human impact? Well, one way is just to become more aware. The eyes represent noticing and seeing and awareness. So once you think of this as something that's relevant to you and that you can control, then you will probably start to notice it more often. You'll both in your own interaction with technology and how technology affects how other people interact with you, and also what people talk about. You can look at it in a different light. You can then think about it by having this framework of thinking about how it affects thinking, how it affects feeling, and how it affects doing. And you can talk about it. I put the exclamation mark and the question mark in these bubbles here to represent particularly that this is something that can differ from how people normally think about technology. I think often people either complain about technology. It's one of the things we can all kind of commiserate about, like the weather today, like technology, computers, they're always crashing. Or we rave about it, about how cool it is, like the latest app or my latest smartphone. It's thinner than the last one. It's a bigger screen. It's it can take my blood pressure. But talking about it in ways that challenge those ways of thinking about it, think more like technology is something that we as users, whether in business and in personal life, have the ability and responsibility to shape. That's a different way of thinking. And so, if you make somebody have an exclamation point on their face, that could be good. And don't be afraid of offending them, because it's all to be helpful, and sometimes you need to question people's beliefs to be helpful to them. And lastly, the hand represents action, because they're things you can do. So again, going back to that, you can affect the design even just by sending feedback or commenting on forums. If you like to comment on social media, you can comment on things like how say, certain things about Facebook maybe seem to be affecting your relationships or how you're using your time. You can make choices, and you can change configurations. Now, the example I thought of to mention here is, if you have an iPhone or an iPad, you may have noticed that, or certainly anybody who email has noticed probably, that by default it has a little signature that says sent from my iPhone. So a lot of people don't change that, even though you certainly can change it. Now that is obviously designed cleverly by Apple to support their goals that it markets for them. Normally when you get an email from somebody, it doesn't tell you, and this person's using an iPhone. But if it's an iPhone and you haven't changed that setting, then it does. And Apple's also cleverly done that because they know people are proud of their iPhones, so they kind of like the idea of showing off that I have an iPhone, right? But is that
That's 4 or 5.
okay? Great. But you don't have to have it set that way. And so if you take a passive approach and just say, oh, it's set that way, so I guess that's just how it is, then it affects you however it affects you, and it does Apple a favor. But maybe you could put something in there that was, say, promoted your business better. And really, when you send an email, don't you want to be promoting your business rather than Apple's? If you want to show off that you have an iPhone, you can say, sent from, you could put a business one and say, and we're so cool, we have iPhones too.
God bless Steve Jobs.
Anyway, the point is there are lots of things you can configure that most people never do. And I don't think it's only because it's too confusing to figure out to configure it. It's more like they don't even think of it because of the attitude. So my overall message is there's a lot you can do here, and it really can make a difference to your business. And I encourage you to contact me if you want to follow up with any questions or anything. But appreciate your attention, and there's time for some questions. And if there aren't any questions, I'm going to grill you for examples.
Well, I think about our line of business software, ConnectWise, it's a CRM package, and it got me thinking. There's some features in there we don't use. One we do is if a customer hasn't paid their bill and they're on a credit hold, anytime a technician goes to do anything, create a service ticket, a window pops up. And we can do that for anything we want to do. So if there's an action that happens, we can pop something up to tell people. Is that kind of what this?
Yeah, just the fact that it can pop up is one thing where it can provide a reminder. Mm-hmm. And so having it either pop up or not pop up could be significant in itself. Just the fact that it can do that, and whether that's actually helpful in giving context. Mm-hmm. And then what it says can be even more significant if it is popping up. Because, and especially say if it's something they might be using while they're on the phone with a customer, the wording of that message could affect, say, how they think of the customer. Like if they're on a credit hold and that message is worded in a way that sort of unconsciously conveys an assumption that, like, if this person on a credit card, they're probably like an irresponsible, good for nothing. Just that wording unconsciously may make the person talk to the customer in a slightly different tone of voice that doesn't treat the customers well. Right? So it can be as subtle as just changes of phrasing. We saw how even just a font change can make a difference you wouldn't expect. But wording can for sure make a difference. And then the other thing is sometimes it might be popping up where it really would be more helpful for it not to pop up at all.
True.
So you should take the word deadbeat out of that.
I know, yeah. Hang up now.
Put it in all caps. Don't take his order.
I have a question, and I'll relate it to the healthcare since you've been.
And I can
working
go back
with
to
this
slides
topic.
if that's relevant, if you don't.
Very good. So my question is, some of these things that you are identifying, maybe the hospital or whatever that you're working with the business doesn't realize it's a problem. Do you do an evaluation on the technology? Like when you meet the CEO, if it's a referral, how did that come to you? And then my other side of the question is, if you're doing the evaluation, do you compile data and then give them recommendations based on surveys or, other different types of polls out there? How does...
It will all depend how it starts. If I gave a talk like this and to an audience where they hadn't thought about this kind of thing much before, and then they think, this might apply to me, but I'm not quite sure how, and they contact me, then I can ask them questions about their situation and what seems to be going on. Well, what problems they are aware of that they may not think have anything to do with technology. Like they might think it's a training issue. Like, my receptionists keep on being rude to my, people, and I keep on trying to train them not to, and it doesn't seem to be doing any good. I might say, well, let's look at what your receptionists are having to interact with while they're talking to these people. Perhaps that's part of the problem. That just making it easier to use might free them up to pay more attention to it. So that could be an example. But if they come with a specific problem where they say, we have this, our technology isn't, is distracting our doctors too much. The doctors are complaining that the technology is getting in the way when they're trying to interact with patients. Then I can say, okay, you know, I'll come look at that and try and figure out the details of how you could improve that.
So, let's see if I got this. So I was listening to this radio interview this morning, and I'll give you a couple snippets of it because it's relevant to the question. They were talking about Socrates, and I guess Socrates was around when they invented writing. And Socrates was quite worried that that was going to be detrimental to mankind because they didn't have to remember things anymore, they could actually write it down. And so the premise of this interview was technology doing the same thing to humanity now? And one of the specific questions was, is online education going to do away with the school system? And the guy's answer to that was, no, because they're two different things. You go to school, particularly in the early years, to learn how to learn. Once you know how to learn, you could really use online education to a great benefit. But if you never learned how to learn, you couldn't use the technology.
Right.
So if I had a company and I was all excited about that but didn't know how to do that, I'd call you, right?
You mean how to teach people how to learn with online education?
Know how to get the technology and humankind to be beneficial to each other.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean that's really what I'm all about. When I say my tagline is unlocking human potential through interactive technology.
Right.
So the goal is to unlock the human potential. And my main message is that looking at interactive technology and how that affects us, rather than just what it does for us, is a really important key to unlocking our potential in our current and evolving environment. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, because I think we sort of tend to worry about this technology, whether it's writing or computer technology coming along, is going to destroy the human condition.
Yeah.
And it's not. The human condition's stronger than that, but there's a certain amount of angst that goes
Well, you
around.
tend to get people divided into the camps who are sort of generally anti-technology and generally always complaining about it and how it's going to turning people's minds into vegetables and things. And then the people who are just love whatever's the latest technology and are quite uncritical of it. And so, yeah, what I'm trying to do is focus people more in the middle of saying, look, this technology is here, it's not going away, and if we attend to it in the right way, we can really make it a good thing for us. But if we just treat it as this kind of inanimate tool stuff, it's going to do what it does to us, and then there are also going to be people out there who do understand what it can do to us and are going to use that in ways that serve their interest rather than ours.